Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Captain's Table. I'm your host, Captain B-Nard. The topic of discussion today is going to be current events and controversy for DC, Marvel, and Star Wars. So we're talking movies today, and here to discuss all that with me, returning to the Captain's Table for the eighth time, we have my bro, Mitchelonius. Welcome back.
Just takes one bad day.
Yeah, sure. Um, we're going to be talking about, what's been going on in the cinemas the last few months and what will be going on the next few months. Um, and all that good stuff because this is usually like the fall is usually kind of like a lull, I think, for like the action adventure superhero sci-fi type stuff, although it's been pretty eventful lately this year for whatever reason. So we're going to talk a lot about that. We have pretty much one topic from each of those franchises that I mentioned. We're going to start off with talking about, on the Marvel side, Spider-Man Far From Home, of course, just released a few months ago. And the controversy surrounding the status of Spider-Man in the MCU. We're then going to move to, on the DC side, talking about Joker, which actually just came out a couple of weeks ago, and of course the controversy surrounding the subject matter of that movie with all the social backlash that has followed. And then we're going to close by talking about Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker, which obviously will not be coming out for another couple months at this point, but we do have a couple of trailers and a lot of speculation as to what that might entail. So, do you have anything you want to add to that before we begin, Mitchelonius?
Well, I think that our primary topic of conversation, well, more than the current widely viewed by critics and viewers alike, movie The Joker. But
Yeah, we'll probably spend the
aside
most
from
time talking about that, I would say, because it's been so long since DC actually gave us a good movie. So, so it is definitely worth
well, I mean,
worth
besides the
noting.
fact that in my opinion, besides the fact that Far From Home was a good movie, um, it's been a little bit of time since that's
Yeah, that's not
sort of
quite as
hit.
current of news as the Joker, and obviously the Star Wars stuff is more looking to the future. So, but yeah, we are just gonna jump right in and get started then. So of course. The Spider-Man Far From Home came out a few months ago at this point. It was billed as the final installment of the Infinity Saga of movies in the MCU, the 23rd movie in the MCU, actually. And it was supposed to be kind of like the wrap up to everything, even though Endgame, which of course was before that, kind of wrapped everything up in a pretty neat little bow, more or less. So, as far as Spider-Man: Far From Home goes, I will say we're not going to do like a full-fledged review of the movie or anything, but we're just going to kind of talk about what we liked about it and didn't like about it, if anything, and then kind of go from there. So,
So
go ahead.
we're doing a review of the movie. Gotcha.
Yeah, and not yeah, sure, not like a not like a like really in depth review is kind of what I meant. So,
No,
but yeah, I
no.
will
So for
say
me,
as far as Far From Home, I will say I did love the movie. I thought it was a great movie. I thought, well, of course, as to be expected with pretty much anything in the MCU, you have
love
their
it.
signature movie formula that they have down packed of, action, comedy, adventure, storytelling, all that good stuff. So, that was, they never disappoint, and this one was no exception. I would say it's an instant top 10 as far as the
Well, I
MCU
mean,
goes, in my opinion. Um,
I agree with you to a degree. I mean, I had my disappointment with the MCU, and as your viewers that are standing and have seen my other podcasts, they know that I am a DC fanatic. So,
yes.
with my biased in um,
With
which
your
my
bias
opinion
fully
is
intact, you will make that statement. I
yeah,
gotcha.
absolutely, because you know what, even if Warner Brothers produced a movie that probably was better than a lot of the DC movies that have come out lately. I mean, not obviously leaving out, Wonder Woman, which really hit home. A lot of people seem to enjoy, or Aquaman, which personally I felt was an excellent installment. Not the biggest fan of the newer Batman movies,
Yeah, not a
but
lot
as
of
far
people
as
are.
DC goes, I do feel like the Joker kind of, I don't know, in a way for me it was like a rebound. And the saddest part is that, like,
It's not even part
canon
of the
DCU
DCEU
had nothing to
apparently.
do with, yeah, they're going to be calling it like the dark DCU, and they're talking
Gotcha.
about more movies, but I mean, again, anywho,
Yeah, we'll get back to
back
that in a
to
second. So,
Spider-Man and
going
your
back
your
to
Marvel.
Far From Home, I would do want to get that out of the way first. I will say that I really liked what they did with this movie because overall I felt like it was nice to have a movie that was kind of like more grounded and down to earth after having the movies that had such grandeur and huge implications to everything like Infinity War and Endgame, which were also great movies. But it was nice to kind of have a movie like Far From Home to a note to end on that really brought things back down to earth, so to speak. So I did enjoy
Yeah, I
that. I
mean,
really enjoyed the adaptation of Mysterio in this movie. That was a big thing big takeaway for me because Mysterio, like in
may I interject here?
what's that?
May I interject while the topic's hot?
Sure, go
Um, I,
for it.
I, I also I also did enjoy watching Iron Man 1 through Spider-Man's perspective.
Well, that is
Just,
definitely one of the
just,
popular grievances. Although there aren't too many complaints about this movie, I don't think, but that's one of them.
I'm not saying Mysterio is Ironmonger or anything, and I'm not saying that, like, we kind of got to see how Tony became who he was, and I'm not saying they were handing the torch down in this movie, and then at
Oh, they
some point
absolutely were
Sony,
handing the torch
ah,
down in this movie. I won't argue with you there. Um,
well, yeah, and then
I don't think
Sony
that's
was
a
like
bad
egg
thing,
on your
though.
face, but
I definitely don't think that's a bad thing. What's that?
and then Sony was like, well, egg on your face.
Yeah, and that's definitely what we're going to be driving toward with this. But yeah. So like I was saying, I really did like the way that they adapted Mysterio because Mysterio in the source material and like the comics and even in the cartoons and stuff has always been really like a C-level Spider-Man villain, like really not that big of a deal. So it was cool to me that they were able to, or the way they were able to modernize him and kind of, make him a big deal in this movie. I really liked, the way that Jake Gyllenhaal played the role. He really killed it. Actually, one of my only grievances with this movie was the fact that they killed him off because I really would have loved to see him reprise that role in a future film. So killing him off at the end was, I understand why they did it, but
Well, yeah,
personally,
something Marvel's been known to do, with Venom and
well, the bad guy dies. That's usually what happens in
it,
in the MCU. So, aside from a
and then there's a
select
reboot.
few
But,
exceptions, so um,
I must say, Spider-Man has been one of the hardest franchises to just get a full handle on, because I mean, if you think about it, you've had your Tobey Maguire, which I
mhm.
know wasn't DCU, but, or correct me if I'm wrong if it was, but I
No,
mean,
it wasn't MCU. It was
you know, it,
pre-MCU.
it yeah, well, it made it to a trilogy.
It did.
Um, then Saturday Night Fever killed it, and
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have to think about that though.
but no, no, no. But this is important because then you have the Amazing Spider-Man, which Andrew Garfield, I
Yeah,
feel, reprised the role greatly. I feel like he fit it maybe a little more than Tobey Maguire,
yeah,
minus the fact that he's a little bit of a pretty boy in the movie.
yeah.
And then you have Tom Holland, which in my opinion, it's like, in this case, I will say the third time is Tom Holland fits the part for exactly for what he plays,
hmm
age, all of it.
Yeah, that's
But
the common
yeah,
grievance that a lot of people, or I guess the common notion that a lot of people have about now the third Spider-Man, in recent memory of all three, actors who've played Spider-Man in recent memory, is that Tobey Maguire made a good Peter Parker, but he made a poor Spider-Man, versus Andrew Garfield, who made a good Spider-Man but a poor Peter Parker, versus Tom Holland, who makes both a good Spider-Man and a good Peter Parker. So I definitely would agree with that sentiment pretty much on all levels. That definitely, like you said, the third time was the charm as far as nailing it down. So, but yeah, and Tom Holland's Spider-Man is the first one to actually officially enter the MCU. But that is actually a good segue into the controversy surrounding this movie. Although while this movie was a widespread success, and most people, despite the nits that you're picking, actually did love this movie. Only a few weeks or maybe a month at most after the movie was released, we got the blockbuster news, the shell shocking news that apparently Sony and Disney had not reached an agreement as far as Spider Man's future in the MCU, because for those of you who don't know, essentially Spider-Man was on lease from Sony to Disney. Essentially, was the deal that was going on, and that
worse than at least. I don't know if you know the specifics of it, but continue.
yeah, no, I didn't know
I'll
this.
elaborate if you.
Yeah, I didn't know the specifics of the deal, but that was the the nuts and bolts of it as I understood it. So they had a deal for several movies, and cameos, and that deal had expired after Far From Home. And then I guess apparently the contract negotiations broke down for a future because Disney wanted more, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Was that what
Well,
was
I
going
mean, they
on?
wanted something. That was the problem is that Disney. I mean, don't get me wrong. Disney makes enough money
Hmm.
where it sits, but here's the thing: if you're producing a product, if you're revamping a title, um, whether or not you're leasing said character,
Hmm.
when you have a deal stricken for literally, and I mean literally when I say that, Disney only makes money on the first day of movie release for any solo Spider-Man performance, as to where Sony then
Makes
takes
everything
the
else.
rest. And I mean, if you ask me, that's a very raw deal, and there had to be a very uh, specific reason that I'm sure we're not currently aware of yet, but are kind of getting the idea of because of the death of Iron. At this point, I shouldn't have to say spoiler alert
Yeah,
for
no,
MCU.
I missed the spoiler alert in the beginning, but I thought that was kind of implied when I said we were going to be talking about Far From Home Joker and etc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you know what? If you haven't seen Endgame yet, get off this podcast because I don't want to
Yeah,
talk.
that's well, yeah, that movie's
Yeah.
kind of old at this point, but yeah, no, I get
Um,
what you're saying
but my point
completely.
is, my point is that that's a very raw deal. So after, what was it? You would
Like
be
4 years of that,
strength on
basically.
this than me. Well, you had his presence in Homecoming. This isn't going to be chronological, folks, but Homecoming, Civil War, Far From Home. Was there one of
Infinity
them
War and
missing? I feel like
Endgame, I
there's
think
one
that's
of them
it.
missing. That
Yeah,
might be it. Okay,
yeah,
so that was the deal, and
yep,
then he had two solo movies and one cameo, and I'm sure Sony made a bunch, and
absolutely.
Disney then turned, and this is what it was leading to, is that where the fallings out of their deals went is Disney said, listen, we just want 30% of all royalties. You can have 70. That was not good enough.
Yeah,
That
apparently,
Sony
yes,
had
that was the
Sony.
original contract negotiation that had fallen through, was that, and apparently, as I
Yeah, but
understand it,
Sony didn't even reply back with another, like there
they
was
just
no
said no and walked
negotiation.
away.
Disney
That's what I
asked
was gonna
for
say.
this,
Yeah,
yeah, and Sony was like nope, and then just kind of left it there. And I to be honest with you, I don't know the specifics of it now, because what we will be leading into, folks, is that things and it was a scary amount of time, but things did get resolved, so no
Yeah,
worries.
it was
But
a few weeks, I think, in between. So basically, the chronology, as I understand it, was that happened like maybe about a month after Far From Home was released. We then had like a few weeks of like turmoil, essentially, where everybody was just kind of like shitting their pants, like, "Oh my God, what's going to happen?" Because the
because the
fact
whole
of the
movie was
matter,
about essentially him becoming Tony, and then
and
now
then
that
all of a sudden
Tony's
he's
gone, you
gone.
can't even reprise that, and then all of a sudden Sony's like, nope, and like,
Yeah, well, that's well,
of
right,
course the MCU was gonna freak out because okay, where do we go from here? Sure,
right,
you've got other movies in the MCU. What Phase 4 is what's coming,
yeah.
but at the same time, when you had somebody take on such a mantle, you know,
Well,
as
yeah,
to
because the
being
whole thing
essentially
with the
Iron
with
Man
Endgame
2.0.
and leading into Far From Home was the fact that like okay, so you get rid of Iron Man and Captain America essentially, who have been the leaders of the Avengers to this point, or the poster boys for Avengers to this point, and then you even look at like everyone else from like the original group
But
of
it's even to
Avengers. They're
where
all pretty much either gone or handicapped or something. So they really like the transition was really made, like the passing of the torch, or the mantle, if you will, was already made to pass to Spider-Man, which really came full circle in Far From Home, and then to have that just seemingly ripped away in an instant by Sony not wanting to negotiate a new deal with Disney was just like such a shell shock to everybody. um,
I feel like it was kind of there was a form of irony there because
mhm,
if you think about it, Marvel was lost before Robert Downey Jr. reprised the role of Iron Man,
mhm,
made Iron Man 1. Just that's where it started for MCU.
mhm.
Now you have a movie where directly after he's gone, you pass the mantle down, and then that potential character that keeps that torch, that flame going, is now going to disappear potentially.
Oh, yeah. So
That
that would have been a
really,
massive
it,
problem and a massive blow to the MCU for
well, not
sure.
even just that, but I'm saying the irony behind it because there
Oh
were a lot
yeah.
of people, fans, and they were like, I felt like it was Iron Man 1,
Hmm.
not to the degree that it was obviously it wasn't an identical movie, but it was next to Iron Man
There were a lot
1
of
with the way that
parallels that could
things
be
kind of
drawn, and I will definitely give you that.
and,
You could definitely draw quite a few
um,
parallels there.
and then directly after that movie that was supposed to keep the train rolling forward,
Yeah.
you know that least character almost gets yanked, and I
I was
think
gonna
that's
say,
where a
but
lot
not to
of
fear, folks, because so we understand at this point, at the time of this recording, like I said, there were a few weeks of uncertainty there, and apparently a new deal has been struck, though we do not know the particulars of said deal. A new deal has been struck apparently between Sony and Disney, which will keep Spider-Man in the MCU. So hooray, happy ending for everybody. I will say that a couple interesting things that I've read about this is I read actually recently that Tom Holland actually had a big hand in, I guess kind of, I don't want to say pressuring, but basically pressuring Sony and or Disney into trying to strike up a deal, trying to get talks back going because that's the one thing I think I've mentioned this before that I love about the MCU so much is that you can just feel and tell how much these stories and these characters mean to the actors who play them, and this is a great example of that, of Tom Holland himself actually going to bat for Spider-Man and for wanting to keep that character within the MCU, which, like I said, just really speaks to that these actors really do care a lot about these stories and these characters, and not just about making money. So that was pretty cool. Um, But yeah, so fortunately, it looks like everything's going to be, okay. There's a lot of rumors as to, what the deal is going to be or what it is, or also, potential rumors that Sony is just going to sell Spider-Man and all, related characters and items to Disney, which, in my personal opinion, would be the best way to go because we don't need anything like this happening in the future. A and B, although I do love Sony, I am a PlayStation guy through and through. I will say that Sony has proven time and time again that they don't exactly know what they're doing as far as cinema, specifically with superheroes. So I definitely would be happy if that were the case and that they just sold everything to Disney and just were done with it. So um,
Well, I feel like that's the most legitimate claim because if they turn down 70-30,
yeah.
I mean, they were probably they probably didn't counteroffer right away because they were like, well, fuck it, we might as well just
Yeah.
let them have it,
Yeah, and
you
and
know.
I feel like, that just makes the most sense. I definitely agree with you. That just to me it just
And I do think the story of how, just for the record, you're great MCU because at the end of the day we are rivals.
sure.
Um, how well Stan Lee apparently was treated by Disney and
Oh, that's another controversy. Yeah, that's taking it back even farther because Stan Lee, unfortunately, the great one himself, had passed away. Either what was it? Either the end of last year or the beginning of this year, I think. But I don't remember the exact time that
I'm not
happened.
sure myself to
Yeah,
be
but
quite honest with
but
you.
apparently his daughter had come out afterward and said that apparently she felt that he wasn't treated very well by them. Which, to be honest with you, I don't want to spend too much time talking about that because I have to doubt kind of like how true any of that could be because you always see like all these interviews with him in the past and like all these photos and videos from the set and all that stuff and how much everybody loved him and idolized him and appreciated him. So I find it a little hard to believe that you know
It wasn't that the workers or like directors
well,
or
no, I get
anything.
it. For
It
whatever
was
reason, felt underappreciated by the company itself, um,
no, it was the
which is
CEOs
different.
that apparently mistreated him.
Right. So, which I mean, I guess you don't know what goes on behind closed doors. So, like, yeah, it could be possible, but yeah. So who knows? Um, but yeah, I think that pretty well wraps up the whole thing with Spider-Man. Unless you have anything else you want to add about that or the movie. And I know
Just
you didn't really have
overall,
much to say about the movie itself, aside from a couple of hollowed criticisms. But yeah,
overall, let me say it then. Overall, great movie. I enjoyed it. Uh, I do feel that they might have went a little hard on the passing of the torch, because it just kind of seemed like I would agree with people that it just seemed a little
too on the nose. Like
like
they
the
made it too
of
obvious.
the new Tony.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can
like
agree
it
with
wasn't
that.
very subtle, you
Yeah.
know. But aside from that, I do feel like it was a great movie. Favorite scene so far, in the movie was when they're in the plane and he says to Happy, "I need a suit," and then like the lab opens up on the plane, and then they start playing music, and he's like, "I love AC/DC," and
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. I'd say my favorite movie in or favorite scene I should say in the movie. I thought you were gonna say this too. Is the shocker at the end of J.K. Simmons reprising J. Jonah Jameson in the post credit scene. That was
no,
that.
that was cool, but no, but what really resonated with me was this, because whenever Tony would be in the lab working,
Yeah, he'd always
that
have that
was,
music
I
playing.
think, that might have actually been like the first song in the first Iron Man movie. Like that's why,
Yeah.
but it was still, it was great. It was a great moment. I thought that was a great moment because just
Oh
the
yeah.
fact that Peter was just like, I love AC/DC, and
It was fucking Black Sabbath, I think, or Ozzy. Um, but
a
yeah,
part
it
of
was
you, a part of you looked at him like, really?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that was great. And there were a lot of great moments in the movie. Honestly, I thought. Um, I will say, as far as criticisms of my own. I don't really have much else to say negatively about the movie. I will say I was very surprised by the end credit scene that I had referenced with J. Jonah Jameson, the legend himself, J.K. Simmons returning, which was just such an epic level of fan service there that I marked out. I'm not gonna lie, because I love Jay Jonah as a character, and I love the way that J.K. Simmons played him. So, despite the fact that he's older now and doesn't really look as much the part as he used to, it's still awesome moment there. But that wasn't really the big story. The big story was the whole Mysterio revealing post humorously, mind you, revealing to the world that Peter
Oh
Parker
yeah.
is Spider-Man, which is obviously a huge bombshell leveled that who the hell knows where they're going to go from there at this point. I thought it was kind of ironic that like the whole time, the whole movie, Spider-Man is trying to keep his identity a secret, and then he seemingly succeeds, and then all of a sudden the post-credit scene just blows him out of the water. I have to say, with those post-credit scenes, they were both pretty big actually, and I can't remember another or any other post-credit scenes in any other MCU movies that really had the big-time implications that these ones did actually. Because not only do you have that one that we just discussed, but you also have the second one with the what are they called? Oh man, the Skrulls were actually posing as Fury and Hill throughout the entire movie, which was another pretty huge bombshell. To find out that the real Nick Fury is like floating around in space somewhere, probably in prep for the Captain Marvel sequel. Um, but yeah, that was a pretty big bombshell too. So, but other than that, I don't think we really have too much else to say about this. I think things are definitely looking up and in a positive direction now, especially after the whole deal was resolved between Sony and Disney. So, but yeah, I think that's a good place to move on to our next talking point, which is one, of course, that I know you're going to be a lot more excited about, and that is
Yes.
going to be Joker. So that just came out about a week or two ago at this point. And yeah, like I mentioned before, I said it half jokingly, but this is the truth. DC has definitely not been delivering very well, aside from the gem here and there, namely Wonder Woman. DC has not been delivering the
And
past
Aquaman.
decade on movies very well. Aquaman, I don't know if I'd probably argue with you over that, but yes, so but yeah, the Joker I won't argue with you on because we both saw it actually together opening weekend, and I have to say that I was very impressed with this movie. I was very impressed with the storytelling in this movie was very deep and very powerful. I was very impressed with Joaquin Phoenix's performance as the Joker. I had a lot of skepticisms heading into this movie because of the fact that I am such a huge fan of Heath Ledger's Joker, which is, of course, now 11 years old, I believe it is. And I didn't think that anyone else could play the role as well as him after the fact. And we got big time confirmation of that when we had Jared Leto play the Joker in the Suicide Squad a few years back, and I'm sure you don't want to think about that.
No, no.
So, but yeah, I will say
I
that
don't even know how they can. I don't even know how they can continue to use Leto after what just happened.
I don't think they will, and that brings me to another part of the controversy that we're going to talk about here. Was Jared Leto actually reacted or responded to the Joaquin Phoenix Joker? And I guess he wasn't too happy about it. But anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But yeah, as far as the movie itself goes, I will say I did enjoy this movie quite a lot, and that's something that I haven't been able to say about a DC movie in quite a long time. But yeah, I do have a couple criticisms, but I'll save them for after you. So if you want to go ahead and because I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about this movie, so I will give the floor over to you for that.
Well, first off, movie was fantastic. It was as dark as it needed to be to the perfect degree. I mean, if they got any darker, I don't think they could rate it R.
Fair
Uh,
enough.
I mean, it really hit home in a lot of ways, and I understand that Joaquin Phoenix and the director, can't remember his name at the current moment, but he they both refused to, like, not that you don't know about the Joker, because anyone who's hasn't lived under a rock knows who the Joker is, but I mean, he kind of brought it to a degree where they didn't want to make it a comic book kind of rendition of the Joker. They wanted to kind of, instead of the vat, or like the stories that we know well, which consequently enough are the minor origins within the comics, to be blunt, but they wanted to just kind of have their own, where in a way society brought this about onto themselves, not in a actual city, but in the fictional city of Gotham, where they uh or is it non-fictional? You know what, I'm not a reader, so I
No,
read
it's
comic books.
fictional. It's fictional. You got it right.
Either way,
Yeah.
it was about a city in turmoil, where beyond what we already have going on in this country, because again, this movie kind of hit some political strifes apparently, but um, beyond anything what we have going on in this country, the city was really falling apart, and essentially imploding. Which anyone who's a Batman fan knows that, like, that was the purpose of Batman, was to take that away, prevent that from happening, save Gotham.
Yeah,
So at this point, we get an early taste of where
a
Gotham's
pre-Batman
heading,
Gotham,
which
yeah. And Gotham kind of, and
yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong, but Gotham always reminded me kind of like a 1920s, 1930s like gangster town kind of, and I guess, that's what that's kind of what it feels like it was modeled after, and it just kind of like, it does have that dark, depressing, air to it, and Batman kind of arrives to hopefully change all that. But this is, as we said, this is pre-Batman, and one of the grievances that I have with this movie, which I guess I'll get out of the way now, is the fact that you actually see, you know, you see young Bruce Wayne in this movie, and they actually have him meet the Joker before he becomes the Joker again, which is something that I didn't enjoy at all, because it's very it's not canon, it's not source material, and I get that this movie is not technically supposed to be, any of that, but like, the one thing that I didn't like about this movie is that I feel like it tried too hard to draw connections between characters that just don't exist in the source material, and not like little things either, like things that would have been a big deal, like that, like if Joker had ever met Batman before he was Joker and he was Batman, like that would have been a pretty big fucking deal, you know what I mean? So like, the fact that they're doing something like that in this movie, that's just not true to the source material, did bother me. But I digress, though. That's not like a huge deal in terms of, like, that's not a huge knock on the movie in my opinion. That's just like a side knock. So if that makes sense. But I will say, going back to something that you mentioned earlier, and I didn't want to cut you off, was that one of the concerns I had going into this movie was that it was not going to do the Joker justice as far as an origin story goes, because the Joker, as we both know, is one of the most sick, twisted villains to ever cross any comic book in any franchise. So I was worried that this movie would not do that justice, because you feel almost like when you see the Joker in the comics as Batman's arch nemesis, essentially, you feel like you don't know what happened that made him the way he is, but you feel like it's just unimaginably horrible. And I didn't, before I saw this movie, I didn't feel like this movie could live up to that. And I have to say, after having seen this movie, it definitely did live up to that. So I was very pleased with that. So,
Yeah, I mean, me as well. When they, and again, I mean, are we allowed to release spoilers? Spoiler
well,
alert
yeah,
here.
I mean, it's a relatively new movie, but that is this subject matter. So, you don't have to get into anything too specific, but whatever you want.
I just feel like when you continue to see him just kind of be a doormat and try to be nice and get beat, and
Yep.
the system fail him to the degree of like, oh, now he can't get help or remain normal, and then
Yep.
how it just was a progression to his psychosis. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like the moment that really did it in for him,
Mhm.
is when he got his hands on that folder and actually met and talked, because that's something that bothered you as well,
Yeah.
is that like he spoke with Thomas when
Yeah, that was
he
something
didn't
else.
you didn't like it, you didn't like the crossover, but I will say that off of what Thomas Wayne had said to the to Arthur at that moment, because that's who he still was,
Mhm.
and then him finding out that that's a valid, what he said was valid.
Yeah.
I think that's what essentially tossed him over the.
Yeah,
It's
and
again,
yeah, and I agree.
the whole
Yeah.
political controversy, the whole social controversy is that they're like, oh man, well this is something that can actually happen to someone.
Mhm. And that was
You
kind of the
know,
point of the movie
what if
was that
they?
they were making it so like the story that was being told, and I thought it was a great story, and I enjoyed the ride very much. Was the story of the movie was telling you that under the right circumstances, pretty much anybody could be the Joker. I mean, you look at and like I said, we're not going to talk about too specifics too much here, but you see like you said, the gradual progression of the life of this kid. He was abused as a child. He has mental health issues. As a grown up, he has issues. He's picked on. He's bullied. He's looked down on for who he is and what he does, and he's mistreated by pretty much everyone around him. He's rejected by pretty much everyone around him, and at some point, like you said, the system fails him, on so many levels in so many different ways. And at some point, he's just had enough. And that point is, when he gets the folder from Arkham and he realizes that, everyone, what he's been told is true, that he didn't want to believe, that, I guess that it was his, mother's fault. So it was like, it's quite the story to follow. It really is, um, and I did appreciate that, and unfortunately, I guess like you were starting to say, that is one of the key reasons why this movie is under fire, is because people are looking at it and saying like, well, oh shit, this could happen to anybody, and it's like, well, yeah, that was kind of the point of the movie, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess a lot of people can't handle that. Um, so yeah, so the backlash, amongst other things, that this movie has is not only that it was excessively violent or dramatic or whatever, which it was, and like I said, I feel that it was supposed to be, because like I said, it's the Joker, and like I said, one of the most sick, twisted villains to ever appear in any comic book in any franchise. So of course it has to be that way if it's his origin story. But beyond that, the things with the mental health issues were a huge um, sticking point in the movie, a huge plot device in the movie, which a lot of people, I guess, have found uncomfortable because it's too real for them. I guess it's that it's all too real for people and they can't handle it. And there's been a lot of, like you said, fire, under fire a lot, that, um, people are upset about this.
Well, You know when people are upset because what happens is I don't know how well this was stressed upon, or when like you know how people get advanced viewings and critics and yada yada yada, but
Mm-hmm.
they do some like campaigning. I don't know what you would advertising for the movie where they go into interviews and things like that. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Joaquin Phoenix was actually in an interview asked, like he's sitting there, interview is going on for like a little bit, and the person looks at him and goes, "Do you think that your movie could inspire gun violence or someone to reenact, you know?"
What they've seen, essentially.
And
Yeah.
he just got up and walked out. And then the funny part is though,
Mm-hmm.
like an hour later, the interview kind of kicks back off again. He comes back
Okay.
and he looks at the person that's interviewing him and he says, "You know, when I'm asked that question, it upsets me because I try to think of an intelligent answer for it." And he's like, "What do you really say to that?" Because he kind of brought up the whole point of how for years people have been talking about how movies and video games cause violence.
Mm-hmm.
He said flat out, he was like, if you're not ready to see the movie or if you think the movie's going to be uncomfortable for you, I'm not going to destroy my own movie before it comes out, but don't see it.
Right.
And that kind of took the interviewer back a little bit. And then during the interview with the director, he said that, the rapid weight loss with that Joaquin Phoenix took on to kind of fill because he actually wanted to gain weight for the role, but they requested that he lose it,
Right, because the
and he
Joker
did.
is not is a pretty lanky individual. He's not like really muscular or built or anything, you know. So in order to look more the role, he definitely needed to trim down. Absolutely.
Well, here's an interesting fact: is that his diet actually it was how we consume 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day
Right.
on average,
Right.
normal. Um, he hired a nutritionist and the nutritionist worked out a diet to
Hmm.
where he only consumed 500 calories in one day.
Oh, jeez. That's got to trim you up pretty quick,
And
huh?
he did that. And that's where, like, they said the rapid weight loss kind of messed with us because they said even on set, when something bothered him,
Hmm.
he would just walk away, just walk off,
Yeah.
and then would, like, come back at some point. So, like,
Kind of the same way he did with the
they
interview.
explained that exactly. So, I mean, who knows what really could have been eaten at him at that moment, but more
Yeah.
than likely it was the question that just kind of
Well, yeah, and I
gave him the.
think touching on that, another big complaint that I've heard, as far as the movie goes, is that people feel like the movie didn't do enough to drive the point home that the Joker is the villain in this situation. That they think that everything, like, they glorified the gun violence in the movie and they kind of made it look like the Joker was the hero and what he did was like the heroic thing to do and all that. And yeah, I have mixed feelings about that because, okay, if your main character in a movie, in my opinion, is really by default going to look like the hero of the movie, because that's just kind of the way movies are made. There's not a lot of movies, granted, there have been a lot more in recent memory, but historically, there's not a lot of movies told from the perspective of the villain, right? So you would automatically assume that if a character is the main character of the movie or the TV show or the video game or whatever, that that character is the hero. So that, I think that's kind of more of an assumption on the viewer's part. Um,
Well,
but I do,
I will
to a
say this.
point. Go ahead.
I was just gonna. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No, go ahead.
just on that topic, I will say this that in my opinion, any movie I watch, the best villain
Hmm.
is the villain that you kind of feel bad for,
Right.
um, and almost try to justify
Yeah.
what he has done.
And that's
even in other
definitely the
shows.
kind
I
of
mean,
villain that the Joker was in this movie, which was what I was,
yeah.
going to get to, which was, you know, they he was not the kind of villain that you look at, like take, we were talking about the MCU earlier. We'll take a villain like Thanos, for example, and it's like you don't really feel bad for Thanos, as a villain. Like he's an asshole, maybe
Mhm.
you can see his point, but he's just an asshole at the end of the day, trying to kill everybody. But with the Joker, it's like you can see that he is a victim in so many facets of his life. He is the victim of so many wrongdoings. And, I think people have a hard time differentiating between, just because someone is the victim doesn't mean they're a hero. And I think that is the problem that people have making that distinction. And that's what we're seeing here, I think, is because, yes, the Joker, especially in this movie and the way it was told, was the victim of a lot and a lot and a lot of bad shit. um, but that doesn't make him a hero, I think the point was of the movie was that, when someone is pushed too far and when the system has failed them, so many times over, and X, Y, and Z circumstances happen to you, um, that's where he wound up because of all that stuff, and but I can, to play, the advocate for the other side, I can to a point see that, like, because especially at the end of the movie, where you basically have, the crowds of the mobs, lifting him up and praising him, essentially, that does kind of, give you the feel of, like, oh well, he's not really the bad guy, even though he is, but, like, I can kind of understand where people are coming from when they say that, the movie didn't do enough to condemn, his actions, or make him out to be the villain that he was. But at the same time, like, there's only so far in that direction you can go when your movie is villain centric, when your movie is told through the perspective of a villain, especially a villain that's such a tragic villain as the Joker, specifically told in this movie. So, um,
Well, I think that's what worries people the most, to be honest, is because you've got the concept of the Joker,
mhm.
which is supposed to be super sinister, which again they did do in the movie, but um, nobody wants a villain that you feel bad for. Nobody wants a villain that the whole movie essentially he tried not to essentially become what he
What he
was
became.
destined, I
Right.
guess, to become. He was trying to do the right thing, go through the proper channels,
Yeah, I think that's
asking for an increase in his medicine. And, I
right.
think something that wasn't really touched upon that also was like a driving point with the whole, I know which bothered you, but the crossover thing with where his mom kept like expecting a letter for Thomas Wayne and like has had him check the mail for like 30 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like for a letter from Thomas Wayne, and then he finds one written by his mother,
to
and then
Thomas
finds
Wayne.
out all the shit that he found out
Yeah, and
once he confronts Thomas Wayne. I think that that's a very like small part that gets looked at because there's a lot of other shit that happens more that seems more major, but
yeah,
I mean
yeah,
just think
that
about
one might not stick out like a sore thumb like the other stuff does, but I do agree with you in the point of, like, that's like a class clash is what that is you see, and that's how the Joker views it in his mind too, is he sees Thomas Wayne as like the embodiment of like the upper echelon, the upper class that doesn't care about the lower class, essentially, which is him. So, but that is definitely a
and
big deal in the movie. And you're right. I do have to say this, while we're on the subject, is I really didn't like the fact that they went so far out of their way to draw the connections between Thomas Wayne and the Joker, for the same reason that I didn't like the whole meeting of Joker and Bruce Wayne, is because it's not canon. It's not accurate to the source material. Which is something, and it's a pretty big and important divergence from the source material, in my opinion. So, like I said, it's not, even though it's a big divergence from the source material, it's not a big problem with the movie, in my opinion, but it is an issue, and it is something that detracted from the movie, in my opinion, is that they went so far out of their way um, to go against canon, with these specific situations.
But they did take some reference. If they took reference from anything that was the Joker, I will say, uh, The Dark Knight Returns Part Two and The Killing Joke, because
Well, yeah, I was going to say the Killing Joke which is for those of you who don't know, the Killing Joke is an incredibly uh, dark and violent first comic book, then animated film, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
depending on because Arkham Asylum was pretty bad too, but they
Yeah.
only like really did like video game series off that. But yeah, as
Right.
far as the animated series goes, The Killing Joke was pretty. Let's just say they couldn't do everything obviously in the cartoon that they did in the comic, but it was
Pretty
pretty
close.
close.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And I actually was reading
And
about
of
that.
course,
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know what? The only thing that makes, in my opinion, I mean, it's the voice I hear when I think of the Joker anyway. But
Hmm.
to have Mark Hamill reprise the role of the
Yeah.
Joker in The Killing Joke was just awesome for me because
No one did the
he
voice
just
better. Yep.
well, it's just he is to me the comic book like. There's no other Joker
The comic
that
book
I would
Joker
watch
come
in
to
a
life, essentially.
cartoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the laugh, the everything, just the way that he. I mean, I've watched videos of him in the studio
Hmm.
acting and like the stuff that's going on screen, like he's doing behind the scenes to truly like get into that role, and that was a big part for me too. But what I also wanted to say, about the Killing Joke and like it wasn't too much. It was dark, but like the comment that he made one day, like at the one moment, sitting on a couch, is just I had a bad day today, and something in the Killing Joke that the Joker says is one truly bad day can take any or can make the most sane man crazy.
Yep.
So the other thing too, as far as the mail and all that whatnot goes, I mean Albert Einstein, he had a saying where it was do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. And like in his
That's the
opinion,
definition of
that was
insanity.
the definition of exactly. And
Yep.
so the Joker had a lot of subtle things going on in his life, and
Hmm.
then the bigger things just like triggered. I think just years of just repressed like because he would make comments to his mother about why are you so worried about the mail and why are you so like he
Yep.
would make these comments, but then you did see the moments of solace when like he was with his mom and they would watch, TV together and he would
Yep.
feed her, he would take care of her and
Yep.
but I don't know. The movie was just on point. Like if society, and I'll say this because I know this is what everybody's like beating around the bush about, but yes, yes, people, life can really suck sometimes and it can make you feel like you want to do crazy things. But that's the difference. You may feel like you want to do crazy things, but you don't. In the movie, there's no consequence to what he's doing because it's scripted. Therefore, he's going to do the crazy things because it makes it interesting. And that's what people have to realize. Can this movie create another a serial killer or a psycho? No. But a sick person can walk in and watch it and go, that's a good idea. Is that possible? Yes. But will a normal person walking into a theater, and by normal, I don't mean these people that are bringing their children to
Oh
go
yeah,
watch
that's
this
that's
movie and
something
then
else that I
walking
have to
out,
touch on in a second. Definitely.
and that are just walking out because they're like, oh my god, this movie's so bad. Like, dumb shit. It's rated R. Like,
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah, I do
You're
have
not
to I do
taking
have to
them to
touch
go
on that for a
watch.
second here, because
You
that's
know,
something that bothers me, about a lot of situations like this, which is okay. you have people, part of the backlash against this movie is that people wanted to take their kids to go see it, and then it was all dark and violent and depressing, and they didn't like it. So, okay. First of all, 100% agreed with you in the sense that yes, a movie is rated R for a reason. And granted, maybe in the year 2019, which we are currently in, a rated R on a movie does not mean to people what it used to mean when, say, we were kids. But it's still a rating there for a reason, yes, because there is content in the movie that is, questionable to say the least, and
I mean,
and maybe
I
content
would
that
say
younger viewers would not appreciate or want to see. So, if in my opinion is if you are concerned, if you are a parent who is concerned about these things, it is your responsibility to do your homework before you take your kids to watch a movie that is rated R and see, okay, why is it rated R? Is it maybe rated R because some people said some bad words? Okay, well, that's not so bad. But is it rated R because there is a lot of gun violence and dramatic, depressing stories and plot points and scenes and all that kind of stuff? Then that's a little bit bigger of a deal. So the
well,
responsibility is not on the filmmaker, in my opinion, because the filmmaker's responsibility was to rate the movie rated R, which they did. Now it is your responsibility as the consumer to heed that rating and heed that warning and act accordingly. And when people don't do that and then they blame the movie, it really irritates me. So I did have to just kind of interject that. But you were saying?
I mean, my opinion is that the ratings now
Hmm.
are different than what they were when we were kids. I agree with that, but I don't feel like it's. I feel like it's gotten worse because, for example, another movie of mine that is an absolute favorite is RoboCop.
Hmm.
Okay, this movie in 89, I believe, is when it was released.
Hmm.
They couldn't even get the finished product into theaters because in that moment it was rated beyond R. So
Yeah.
they actually had to take things out. And what they were able to leave in was a lot of stuff that was pretty gruesome, as far as the death of Alex Murphy and his dismemberment with weapons and things of that nature that turned him into the prospect to become RoboCop. But now, in PG-13 movies, it's like you see things like violence and you can see nudity and you can
Yeah.
have cursing. So if something earns the rating of R, and then you bring your child to go watch this, and then you're like, "Oh my god." And you want to be angry at anybody? Be angry at yourself, like you said. Like that was the responsibility doesn't lie on the filmmaker. Like he gave. It's like taking too much of cough syrup and then passing out because the bottle says warning, do not exceed X amount of cough syrup.
And then you do it
So
anyway.
are you gonna
Yeah.
are you
Whose
gonna be
fault is
mad?
it? Yeah. And I mean,
But
and
it's the
that's
same
that could.
concept. Are you gonna be mad at the manufacturer? Are you gonna be
Yeah.
mad at Rite Aid? Are you mad at CVS? No, you did some stupid shit. So if you take your kid to go see a movie that is titled, first of all, uh, Joker, and if you have any idea who that is,
I was just
and
gonna
then
say
you
that's
see the
another
movie's
thing we
rated
haven't even
R.
touched on is that if anyone who knows anything again about the origins of these characters would know that, first of all. But yeah,
And this little group of people I hear about petitioning, wanting to get it out of theaters. Like, why does it have to leave theaters? Why do you just not go?
yeah, and I think that that opens up an even bigger discussion that we won't get into here because we try to keep everything loose and have fun here on the captain's table. But that is an even a serious discussion or bigger discussion is the fact, in my opinion, that nobody there is no personal responsibility left in the world. That everybody is always looking to blame everything on everyone else, and no one is willing to take accountability or responsibility for things themselves, which is the real underlying problem in this whole situation, in my estimation. But we won't get into that. So, but yeah, in any event, back to the movie. I will say, I just, I the performance. I have to talk about this for a little bit. The performance of Joaquin Phoenix in the role of the Joker is something that, in my estimation, rivals my personal favorite Joker up until this point, which was, of course, Heath Ledger, who, ironically, in the one film he played the Joker in, The Dark Knight, back in 2008, received quite a bit of backlash as well for, what his role entailed and what he did, what he brought to that role. There was a lot of backlash on that as well. So, the Joker is just that kind of character, that if you portray the Joker in an accurate way, accurate to the source material, that is just the kind of character that he is. That's just what it is. But back to Joaquin Phoenix, I think he really got into the role and he really did the role justice, and that was something that I was a little worried about, honestly, going into the movie. But after having seen the movie, I really my concerns were put to rest because he just did a fantastic job.
What I think is awesome is the fact that he had such an amazing Joker in Heath Ledger.
Hmm.
Then you had such a bullshit Joker in Jared Leto.
Yeah.
And then you get this out of the box performance by Joaquin Phoenix. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think you can truly compare, Ledger's or Phoenix's Joker, because they were just, the movies were so different. You had the Joker, with grenades in his suit. You had the Joker involved in bombings and robberies, and he made a pencil disappear, like in a very gruesome way. Like,
Yeah.
you had a very um already established Joker
Versus the
as
making of the
to
Joker in this movie. Yeah, absolutely.
right. So I think it would be too difficult to, like, if there was a Joker part two and
Hmm.
he was more involved in his ondoings, because a lot of this movie too is that a lot of the people were doing the work for him, and that was another concern as far as, like, social, you know, uh, prejudice towards this movie goes, because people were scared or nervous of the fact that, like, oh, well, things can't be that bad, or, like, it was just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I know
Both
what you're saying.
performances
Definitely.
were both performances were awesome, but I just don't think they can be compared because,
Well, they were
like I said,
portraying.
the
It's
problem
like
is
two different portrayals of the Joker, essentially. Much like, Leto's Joker was a different one, and Jokers of the past, namely Jack Nicholson, who's widely regarded as the best Joker. And it's hard to argue that point, but they all, at the same time, had played basically different versions of the Joker at different points in his life, or his different points in the character's life. The one thing I do want to touch on that I mentioned earlier was the whole thing with, since we brought up Jared Leto, who may potentially be the worst Joker. He There was actually something that I read recently, where he actually came out and said that he was upset about, the fact that everyone is praising the performance of Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, and everyone slammed him for his performance as the Joker, and that I guess he was promised, or that I guess there were in the works other movies for him to play the Joker in, and now, I guess that's all either, in question or been scrapped in the past, or whatever. So, to that
But
I will
even
say,
though even though I mean it was not a DCU
movie,
movie, that
right?
doesn't mean that, like with Spider-Man, that there can't be a deal stricken up to where, like, okay, we don't exactly have a contract with Leto. We kind of had, this is what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
It's very possible that they could turn and say, okay, Warner Brothers, let's talk.
Well,
Because
yeah.
this would be, and I think we both agreed the same night about this, is like, if DC, with who, where they're taking Batman and things like that, if DC would have just maybe jump on this train, it could be very beneficial to the franchise. But,
Yeah, it could definitely
that
turn the
would be,
franchise around.
yeah, I mean, but then again, that also, I think the hard time that, superhero movies really have is that, not for nothing, and we can all agree with this, but, Marvel, even though, they do have their dark points, it's not,
It's a lot more of a
there's no,
lighthearted.
yeah, there's
Yeah,
no comparison in which comic series of any hero is darker.
of
So,
course.
I think that, with Marvel could get away with PG-13 movies and even a rated R movie that probably wouldn't be as bad as what this was. But
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really do that with DC. Like, in
Well,
order
actually,
for a
that
franchise,
raises another good point that I just even that you just made me think of right now, which is they could actually DC could actually potentially carve its own niche out in the superhero genre if they were to go down that path, because spoiler alert for the end of the movie with the Joker, they actually show the infamous, outside the movie theater, the dark alley scene where Bruce's parents die, which was a big shock to me actually in the movie, but they actually show that. So I think, and by the way, side note, something else that bothered me is Joe Chill with the Joker mask on, which again is not canon, but whatever. So anyway, yeah, so those are really my biggest grievances. As a side note to my side note, the biggest grievances I have with this movie, the Joker as a whole, are the inconsistencies with the canon and the source material that it has, and pretty big inconsistencies at that. But anyway, back to the original side tangent. So I had said this the same night, and I stand by this idea, is that it would have been a great idea in my estimation, and maybe it's not too late. Who knows? If they were to decide to make that the jumping off point for the reincarnation of Batman, because the next Batman movie, which isn't slated to come out for another couple of years, I believe, is supposed to be a much younger Batman, or a much younger rendition of Batman. So that would actually go hand in hand with kind of how the end of the Joker movie was left, with Bruce's parents dying and all that kind of stuff. So going back to the original point that I was making with DC potentially being able to carve out its own niche in the superhero genre, is if they decided to fully embrace the dark side, essentially, pun intended for where we're going in a little bit, and decided to delve into, because that's really at the heart of DC, the old joke, dark comics, of course. That's really what's at the heart of the DC source material, is these really tragic, dark, stories. If they were only to just embrace that and kind of run with it, they could really carve out their own, niche of kind of like, really, maybe dark, like rated R superhero movies. And the Joker could have definitely been, or maybe still could be, I don't know, the jumping off point for that. Because despite all of the social backlash and, all that, the political, implications behind, the movie, and the parallels that you could draw between, society in that movie versus our today's society, and all the problems and all that kind of stuff, despite the backlash, this movie is very successful, might be, the most successful, or highest rated, or widely praised by the critics, movie that DC has come out with in quite some time. So like I said, if they were to take that and run with it, who knows, they might actually get somewhere as opposed to getting nowhere, which they've kind of have been for the last decade, in my opinion, as far as movies go, anyway. So, um, but
but the Joker will beat some of your movie sales.
probably a few of them, but yeah, like Iron Man 2, and Thor, the first one,
Black
and
Panther.
maybe what's that?
I said in Black Panther and
No, God, no, no way.
Dark World and oh yeah, you'll see.
Yeah, Thor:
It
Dark World,
it,
definitely.
it might even beat Endgame.
You're funny. Um, but yeah, I think that pretty well wraps up the Joker. Unless you have any closing thoughts, I will say like overall thoughts on the movie. I thought it was a really good movie. I did have my issues with it, mainly the consistency with the canon or lack thereof, is were my primary grievances with this movie. But overall, I think it told a fantastic story, and I've really
Which
much
which
enjoyed it.
shocks me though, because you stand up, you know, foot and toe to defend your movie's inconsistencies, your Marvel inconsistencies,
Well,
and meanwhile, when it comes to a DC movie, well, not exactly, well, the dark DC movie,
mhm.
you're like, well, the inconsistencies really bother
Well,
me.
see, here's the thing,
You
and I
know,
think I have said this before in previous podcasts, is that I'm okay with changes being made as long as they're changes that I could perceive as either beneficial or positive, or they make more sense than what the source material had indicated. And to this degree, I don't feel that way with any of these changes that they made in the Joker movie. I don't think I think that the ways that they broke canon in the Joker movie were just flat out unnecessary, and I get why they did it. I could see the thought process behind it as they're trying to drive a point home, but I just felt that it was completely unnecessary to make that point, to go so hard against their own canon to try and make that point. So
not if there was an ulterior motive to somehow have like this, like we said, this be the jumping off point to a younger Batman.
Well,
So,
yeah, I mean,
I
but
mean,
that's just more wishful thinking, I think, on my side, because they haven't said or done anything to confirm that that's the direction that they're going to go in. Although, I mean, who knows? Maybe
we,
this could spark that, and I think that would be a really smart decision on DC's part. But at the same time, you have to figure that all this backlash from a social and political standpoint that the movie is receiving might hinder that to some degree, or might make DC hesitant to kind of go further down that road when they're already getting kind of bashed for it. You know what I mean? So,
well, what does Hollywood say? Any publicity is good publicity.
well, there you go. That could definitely. Hey, I guess only time will tell what they do with that. But I think that's a good place to end that part of our discussion, which leads us then to our final topic, which will be more of a brief discussion because we don't have a lot of information on it yet, and that is, of course, going to be the fact that in a couple months' time we are going to be getting Star Wars Episode 9: The Rise of Skywalker, which is advertised as the last, not only the last movie in, of course, the sequel trilogy, but of also the last movie in the quote unquote Skywalker saga of Star Wars movies, which I assume it just entails episodes 1 through 9, and I guess maybe the spin-offs. I don't know. Well, I guess nobody really cares about them anyway, so don't have to think too hard on that. But yeah. So at this point,
It's amazing. It's amazing with that statement, though. Even how many people go see it, the movies. It's just,
yeah.
Star Wars is dead.
Yeah, I don't blame you for thinking that way. I really, after what we saw in the last installment, I do not blame you for thinking that way.
Oh,
Um,
let's have a movie called The Rise of Skywalker. And by the way, Leia and Luke and Darth Vader are all dead, so we'll figure that shit out. But you know what we should do? Somehow, some way, the guy that got evaporated and vaporized, whatever you want to say, and whatever the fucking generator, the funnel that he fell down into, that's the guy that we should probably try to bring back. Is that guy, because that'll save our franchise.
all
What
right.
the what?
Okay, so before we get into all that, I have to say, as a side note, apparently, and I don't believe this for 1 second, mind you, but apparently this was the plan all along. That's what the filmmakers are saying. Is that, yeah? I don't believe that at all, to be honest with you. So, for those of you who don't know or haven't watched any of our previous, where we discussed Star Wars on a podcast or two, we are not here at the captain's table fans of The Last Jedi
what's
by
been
any
done
stretch of
to
the
our precious
imagination.
series.
We are all very
Uh,
long-standing Star Wars fans. However, that hit a huge road bump in the form of Episode 8, The Last Jedi, which we all kind of widely
oh,
regard as the worst Star Wars movie that has ever come out, and one that may
yeah,
very well
hearing the
have
title,
doomed the franchise. Go
just
ahead.
just hearing the title hurts. Like
Yeah.
that's how you know a movie's. That's how you know a movie's really fucked up your childhood experience with the series because like really, really you're gonna name a movie The Last Jedi and then probably literally kill the Last Jedi like I don't really know
Yes.
how I feel about that.
Yeah, so we're not
I
going
mean
to
I know
get back into that because we already spent like a whole hour on another podcast talking about why we don't like The Last Jedi and why it's such a bad
well,
thing, why it was such a bad
you
thing.
should down below put a link to that in this you
That was
know
episode 9, I think, of the Captain's. Ironically, that was episode 9 of the Captain's Table, where we, for the first hour of that, discussed why why the Last Jedi was such a just awful thing in every sense. But yes, I can assure you that none of our opinions have changed on that since then. Even though it has been probably at this point a good 6 months, maybe more. I don't even remember. More than that, probably maybe 8 or 9. Anyway, um, but
so
yes, so feeding into back to the Rise of Skywalker. So we have a couple of trailers for this. They don't really show much. They're pretty vague. Not a lot of detail or information. The most significant, and you already alluded to it, but the most significant information that we got out of these trailers, well, specifically the first one, was apparently that Emperor Palpatine is going to somehow make a return in this movie, despite the fact that, as you mentioned in episode 6, which was, well, of course, the last episode of the original trilogy, he was evaporated in the generator of the Death Star. So somehow he's back. I'm sure in spirit form, of course. That would only make sense.
well, apparently the lore or the talk or the rumor is that
Yeah.
because of his, previous master, he may not have had the secret to eternal life, but he might have learned how to pass like his consciousness on to someone else. So
Yeah. So that's the big the
apparently,
hot going theory because there are so many. So
yeah.
so I just want to, before we go into the big theory about what's going to happen in this movie, I have to kind of touch on the big happenings of the trailer. So in the trailer, the only big information you get is you get Palpatine's laugh at the end of the first trailer, which means, is the allusion to the fact that he's going to be around in this movie. You get all the newbies stumbling upon the wreckage of the second Death Star, presumably somewhere on one of the Endor moons, something like that. Which I have to stop for a second when I
That
say that.
wasn't vaporized,
Yes,
in
you
any
took
way,
the
shape, or
words
form.
right out of my mouth. I have to stop for this
That
because you
wasn't
know what?
vaporized.
Okay, I have to say this right here and now. In that movie, in Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, the last movie of the original trilogy, the Death Star was destroyed and vaporized. It was gone, disintegrated, finished. No wreckage, no wreckage, no wreckage whatsoever.
It imploded on itself and then just
Now,
went
in
poof.
this movie, apparently we have the newbies again: Rey, Poe, Finn, BB-8, whoever, um, stumbling upon the wreckage of said Death Star. So how can you have
And not
wreckage
just
to
the
the Death
wreckage,
Star when there wasn't wreckage to the Death Star?
and
Hmm.
not just the wreckage, but like the top half of the Death Star. Like
Yes.
what?
Okay, so let me just say this. I think this is my theory, okay? I think that the makers of Star Wars actually have come to the realization of just how badly they have messed up in the last movie, in The Last Jedi. They realize this now, that they've messed up so catastrophically, and but this is the part that really gets me. Their solution to how badly they've messed up in the last movie is to start retconning details from the original movies, from the original trilogies. Very important details, mind you, such as there was no wreckage of the Death Star when it was destroyed. That
And
really
I
pisses
think
me
they even
off.
said that.
Because you
I
should
think
not,
I
when you have a franchise like this and a series, an ongoing series like this, and you think that the solution to your problems that you've made is to start retconning the original trilogy, that is just some straight up bullshit in my opinion. Okay, and that instantly made me mad when I saw that, and that continues to make me mad every time I think about it or see that trailer. It continues to make me mad because while that might have only been just a detail of the original trilogy, the implications behind that detail are enormous. So the fact that they are changing that now just really just pisses me off, to be honest. So I had to throw that out there because it's
well, I
crazy.
I think even in the original movies, when it got blown up,
Hmm.
I think there was a comment made, "Oh, Death Star has been destroyed," and everybody's celebrating. They're like, "There's nothing left of it." Like
Yeah.
that was stated, and then now
I
in
think
episode
they're gonna
9,
CGI that away just like they CGI'd Hayden Christensen into that movie. So,
yeah, yeah, they turned this Force Ghost into the younger Skywalker.
yeah. Well, what can I say, folks? That is George Lucas, everybody. What can I say? Yeah. So, so yeah, that's a big sticking point for me. The second trailer, the only other big time information that we get, um, in the second trailer, I mean, we get a few bits and pieces of stuff that's hard to make sense of. We get bits of lightsaber fights between Rey and Kylo, which is obviously going to happen. And we get like a history lesson of Star Wars up until that point. We get to see Lando is back because they're definitely not trying to tug on our nostalgia strings at all because they figured, oh well, we killed everybody else from the original gang of characters from Star Wars that everybody likes, so let's bring Lando back. So don't expect him to make it out of this movie alive, folks. That's all I can tell you. Um, but yeah, so the other big significant thing that we got from the second trailer was actually this scene of what looks like Rey holding a dual-bladed red lightsaber, which some people have said that they can apparently see Palpatine's ghost behind her or some bullshit. I don't know. I didn't really scrutinize it too heavily myself. Um, but yeah, so that's the big thing, which leads to, as we touched on earlier, this big ridiculous fan theory that's going around, that apparently Rey is in this movie supposed to be the next vessel for Palpatine's spirit, which is why he's back and all that kind of stuff, which obviously creates an infinitely greater amount of questions than it answers about anything. Which I guess is kind of the point because they're trying to, tease you and, pique your interest and all that stuff. But yeah, so who knows what's going to come of that? Um, I don't know. What do you think?
Uh, Stupid,
Yeah.
because the whole time you have Ray being built up as like this student of Luke and yada yada yada, and how he failed with Kylo and he's scared to fail with her and all this stuff, and then he dies, and then now you're just gonna end it all with like it didn't matter because the whole time, guess who was lurking in the background? Like
Yeah, Palpatine.
yeah,
Yeah. See, these trailers, like the big takeaways from these trailers to me are not those bombshells, but the biggest takeaways from these trailers to me are the air of desperation that the filmmakers and the company has to try and bring people back into the fold, to try and convince viewers and fans that they should watch this movie because the backlash from The Last Jedi was huge, and rightfully so, because we are not the only people out here bitching on the internet that we hated The Last Jedi and that we think it was a huge blow to the Star Wars franchise, to say the absolute least, and it left the Star Wars franchise in turmoil and in a bad place. Because a lot of people think that. Um, but also, I feel like these trailers, like I said, just kind of reek of desperation, because it feels like they're trying so hard to tug on your nostalgia strings, essentially, to try and convince you to watch this movie. Like I said, like, oh, look, here's Lando. You remember Lando? You like Lando? Well, here's Lando again, because we killed everybody else. We killed Han. We killed Luke. Unfortunately, Carrie Fisher has it passed on in real life as well a couple of years back, as we all know. So, who do we have left? Oh, well, let's dust Lando off and bring him out. Or even like with Palpatine, it's like, okay, Palpatine, it's like, okay, a character who was obviously a big pivotal driving force, not only in the original trilogy, but, even more so in the prequel trilogy. Now, you have, oh, well, let's just make it so, like, oh, he's been the big puppet master or the mastermind this whole time again, rather than like thinking of a new story or a new plot point. Let's just bring back, old characters and try to get that nostalgia trip. And I don't like it. I don't like anything about it, to be honest with you, because it's just bad. Okay, it's just bad writing, it's bad storytelling, it's bad everything. It's a lack of foresight, it's a lack of creativity, it's a lack of everything. And if you think I'm being too hard on Star Wars right now, okay, maybe I am, but you know what, I don't care. Because that's just how I feel about it. And even if I wanted to try and take my personal bias out of it, I probably wouldn't have anything much nicer to say than what I'm saying now. So yeah, I don't like it. I am not looking forward to it. um, I assume you would probably echo that sentiment. Yes.
Yeah, the only other thought that I really have is, we say all these things, but who really knows? At the end of the day, what if we end up on here again and we go, well, we were wrong, and the movie was actually really good. It wrapped things up really nice. I mean, that's a very low probability, but I'm just to give credit where it's due, because I know, you know, in a whole series to kind of look at one movie and kind of go, hmm, no matter how big of a mess up that movie was, I mean, let's see what happens. But
Fair
I, I
enough.
just I just don't see I just don't see them being able to come back from the epic screw up that was The Last Jedi, and that's where I sit with it. But
Yeah, and that's
who
that's kind
knows?
of the
I
gist
mean,
of everything that I'm saying too. That I agree with that 100%. That it just feels like, because believe me, as a long-standing Star Wars fan, I have thought about this more than I care to admit, and I have tried to think about. I've watched the trailers for The Rise of Skywalker. I've thought about exactly what has happened, in the sequel trilogy so far, both with the Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. And I have really tried to think of some way that they can make sense of all this in this last movie, that they can fix all of the huge plot holes and monumental screw ups that occurred in The Last Jedi. And I still got nothing. I mean, I think I said this last time we talked about Star Wars, quite some time ago. Is I've tried to think of a way in my mind, or an out in my mind, that they can do something in this movie that is going to fix everything and make everything better. And I can't think of anything. And now maybe, like you said, there is always that possibility, however slim, that we're wrong, and that we just don't know what we're talking about, and that something is going to happen in this final movie that's going to make everything make sense and make everything okay. I doubt it, but it is possible. um, and the reason that I don't think it's possible, just to expand on that a touch, is that I feel like so in the Last Jedi, the thing the biggest problem with the Last Jedi, or the overall problem with the Last Jedi, is that the Last Jedi basically dropped its pants and took a huge shit on everything that we've been told about the Star Wars franchise and the Star Wars universe and what makes sense within that universe over the last 40 years. That's what The Last Jedi did, as far as I'm concerned, as far as you're concerned, as far as a majority of the fans are concerned from what I've seen. So to fathom that this next movie is going to fix all of that just seems far fetched, to say the least. So, but who knows? I mean, it could happen. It's a possibility. I'm not going to say it's not a possibility, because it is. Um, so who knows what'll happen? I guess only time will tell. We'll have to see. We're a couple of months out still from the movie. Um, one other thing I would like to say as far as the movie goes, though, is that the thing that I think, bothers me, maybe not the most, but it's definitely up there, is the fact that it definitely just seems like these companies don't care. And it's the exact opposite. It's very ironic that and I think I mentioned this before as well, that both the MCU and Star Wars are both under the Disney banner. It is incredibly ironic to me because on the one side, on the side of the MCU and of Marvel, you see so much commitment to detail, and you see so much care being taken to to safeguard everything and to make everything make sense. And then on the Star Wars side of things, you just see none of that with this new sequel trilogy. So, it's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it that way. Um,
Russo brothers, come stay, save Star Wars.
yeah, exactly. I don't know if they could even dig it out at this point. Well, actually, you know what? And I might have said this before, but the only out I see is that they have Luke wake up from his nightmare in the beginning of the next episode, and the Last Jedi was just all Luke's nightmare, and no, none of it
He
actually
wakes up into
happened.
a nightmare of Palpatine again.
Yeah, exactly, and that would be the out that I would take. But yeah, I mean, I guess we'll have to see what happens. But my uh, thought is this. If you are a fan, I just have to say this. If you are a fan of Star Wars who is not happy with what you've seen recently, like we are, then I would encourage you to not see this movie. Specifically, not see this movie on opening weekend, because the only thing that companies understand, not to get too political or philosophical or whatever, is when you hit them in their wallet. That's the only thing that they get. So if you want to make an impression as an individual on, a company for turning out a product to you that you think is bad, that you do not like, or that is unacceptable, your recourse as a consumer is to not give them your money. Because at the end of the day, let's be real here, the only thing that these companies care about is, or at least Star Wars feels that way more than anything, and you would probably agree with that, is that they just want your money, and they don't care how many people like us get online and bitch about what they didn't like. They still got our money at the end of the day. They got what they wanted, because at the end of the day, you bought a ticket to The Last Jedi, I bought a ticket to The Last Jedi. They got what they wanted, right? They got our money. So they don't
Yep.
care about the fact that we're just gonna, for it's been almost 2 years since this movie came out, and we're still bitching about it almost 2 years later. And like I said, it's not just me and you. There's a lot of people who feel the same way. Probably the majority of the fan base feels this way. So, the only thing you can do as a consumer is don't buy it. Don't pay for it.
I feel like Star Wars has turned into Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber, because the moment that you could really tell they're like they don't care is like there's a whole movie where you think Luke's gonna really be in it and involved, and the whole time he's not, right up until
And
the
that was the
end, and
best, and that
the
was the
whole
best of the
thing.
bunch so far. Was that movie, by the way,
and,
that you're talking
and,
about?
and the whole, but that's where I knew it was just gonna go all downhill because, like I said, if Star Wars was Anakin's lightsaber when Ray presented this to Luke at the end, and he
Hmm.
took it and just like threw it over his shoulder.
Hmm.
Like, okay. The movie was all built up towards finding you and finding that relic. And once we found you and you received said relic, it just didn't matter because guess what? End credits. And
Yeah, I
then the
think
next
it's
movie,
funny. I think
you
that's
die.
that's actually great symbolism toward probably the makers of Star Wars not care. Like that was basically the makers of Star Wars tossing the fans over the cliff there. Like they
Yeah,
didn't care. So
exactly.
yeah, so you know what? It is what it is. I mean, I guess, only time will tell, what's going to happen. I'm sure there will be another episode of the Captain's Table in the future at some point after The Rise of Skywalker, discussing whether we were right or whether we were wrong and why. Um, but yeah, you know, I guess that's pretty much all we have to say for now. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that, but I think that pretty well covers it.
No, I think that pretty well wraps that up.
All right, so I think that probably actually wraps the entire podcast at this point. So we kind of hit on everything we wanted to hit. I know there's a lot of different topics. The only thing they really have in common here is just the controversy in movies aspect of things. So, I'm interested to see. It's always a developing story with all of these things. So I'm interested to see on all of our talking points where they go from here. But again, only time will tell. And if anything else monumental happens, we will be back here to cover it. So, but yeah, that'll do it for us, I think. Thanks for watching again, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and/or subscribe if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. I want to thank Mitchelonius for joining me once again to discuss these big issues in the world of cinema.
No problem, everybody. Good morning and good night.
Thanks. And so that's it, and we'll see you next time.